This isn't a story about inventions. It's about what happens when a brilliant mind is left alone with only the rain and the rhythm of his thoughts. Welcome back to Mr. Narratory. And if you're here for the first time, I'm glad you found your way in. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. And if you like it, leave a subscription and a like. Take a breath. Settle into the quiet of this cozy room, rain brushing softly against the window. Tonight, we're beginning a story that has echoed through time, one you might think you know, but not quite like this. And before we drift into it, feel free to subscribe if you want more late-night tales, more soft discoveries, more gentle truths to fall asleep to. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered what Nikola Tesla did when the world was asleep? Not the inventor, not the myth, not the lightning-obsessed genius people like to dramatize, but the man, the human being awake in the silent hours after midnight. There's a story hidden in those hours, a story most people don't talk about. Everyone knows about the sparks, the coils, the blinding arcs of light, but very few know what Tesla did when the lights were off. And the answer, well, it isn't what you might think. But let's take our time getting there. Because Tesla's relationship with the night didn't begin with electricity at all. It began with quiet, with a type of stillness he trusted more than daylight. As a child in Smiljan, long before his name meant anything to anyone, Nikola would sit alone in the dim room of his family home after everyone had gone to sleep. He once said those hours were the only ones that belonged entirely to him. There was something in the night that softened the noise inside him, not just the noise of thoughts, but of expectations his families, the churches, the world. And even later in life, long after he had stepped into the blazing center of invention, that same comfort followed him. People often talk about Tesla's insomnia, how he slept 2 hours a night, how he insisted he didn't need more. But they rarely ask why he stayed awake. They assume it was work, obsession, genius. They imagine him pacing around laboratories, burning with electrical currents. But that's not where the story begins. And that's not the part he cherished. Before the experiments, before the calculations, before the nights that would become legend, Tesla had a ritual one so simple and so human that most biographers overlook it entirely. He walked, not quickly, not with urgency, but slowly, almost meditatively, through whatever city he lived, in the streets of Budapest, the avenues of Paris, and later the glowing canyons of New York. And here's the part most people don't know. These quiet walks shaped some of his greatest ideas, more than the lab ever did. This is where the real story of his nights begins, not with inventions, but with steps. Soft, deliberate steps taken under lamps that flickered long before his currents transformed the world. And tonight, in this soft rain, we begin walking beside him, because the man who gave the world lightning spent his quietest moments listening for something much gentler. It was during one of those long, almost ghost-like walks through the quiet streets of Budapest that something unusual stirred in him, not unusual by the standards of his mind, which was always alive with patterns and structures, but unusual in its clarity. Tesla had a way of holding ideas not as if they were puzzles to be solved, but as if they were living things waiting to bloom when the world became quiet enough. On this particular evening, he'd been walking longer than usual, trailing his companion by a step or two, his gaze drifting toward the trees lining the avenue. The wind rustled through them gently, and Tesla, always listening to what others could not hear, found his mind floating not to invention, but to rhythm. There was something in the sway of branches, in the interval between his footsteps and the echo of a distant carriage wheel that hinted at an invisible geometry. He was chasing a ghost of a thought that had followed him for years, the dream of a motor powered not by brute force, but by harmony. It had tormented him, the knowledge that existing motors were inefficient, broken by nature. He knew something more elegant was possible, but the shape of it always slipped away. That night, something changed. As they reached the edge of the park and paused beneath a flickering gas lamp, the geometry he'd been circling suddenly resolved itself. The idea didn't come to him like lightning. He would have rejected that metaphor. No, it arrived like a soft unfolding, a flower opening at dusk. He saw a magnetic field, not as a concept, but as a motion, a rotating wave, one that could push a motor without direct contact. Alternating current was not a novelty to him anymore, but a living, breathing pulse. In that moment, Tesla didn't speak. He simply bent down, picked up a stick, and drew a diagram in the dust beneath the lamplight. He sketched the rotating magnetic field in full motion, speaking almost in a trance, as if repeating something he was merely remembering rather than discovering. His friend watched, bewildered, unsure whether he was witnessing madness or brilliance, but Tesla knew. This was the moment that would lead to everything else. He saw the future there, in the dust at his feet. A motor with no commutator, no sparking, no inefficiency. Something smooth, natural, driven by the very logic of the universe. It was elegant because it was true. And yet, no one else understood it yet. The world was still sleeping. The laboratories still ran on old assumptions. The money men weren't ready. The Westinghouses and Edisons were years away. But Tesla already saw the path. Not the fame, not the fortune, just the design, complete, rotating in the silence of his mind. And as he stood, brushing the dust from his fingers, he wasn't thinking about history. He was thinking about harmony, about how the universe moved in waves, not jolts, about how even machines could learn to mimic the stillness and the rhythm he found each night beneath the stars. He had heard something that night, something no one else could. And though the world would take years to catch up, that sound never left him. For a long time after that night under the lamplight, the design lived nowhere except in Tesla's mind. Not on paper, not in wire, not in the hands of engineers, but only within him, spinning endlessly in thought, complete yet unshared. He carried it like a secret, not out of selfishness, but because there was simply nowhere in the world yet to place it. It is a strange kind of loneliness, to hold a perfect vision and have no one believe it could exist. Those were the quiet years, the invisible ones, before New York, before the newspapers, before the patents. Years of wandering from job to job, walking through cities with empty pockets and a full mind. There were nights he went hungry, not from pride, but from a strange, unwavering belief that what he held inside was worth more than comfort. People saw him as brilliant, yes, but eccentric, idealistic, unrealistic. He tried to explain the rotating magnetic field to engineers in Paris and later in Strasbourg. They smiled. Some were kind, most were dismissive. They wanted results they could touch, numbers they could monetize. But Tesla was trying to speak a different language, one of movement, balance, invisible forces that danced together in harmony. He never shouted. He never forced. Instead, he kept walking and thinking, always thinking. He wrote in the margins of books, napkins, scraps of envelopes, But still, the design lived mostly in silence. What people rarely talk about is the emotional cost of that silence. Not just the loneliness, but the weight of carrying something no one else understands. It would have been easier to forget it, to give in, to build the old motors and take the money. But Tesla wasn't driven by recognition. He was driven by resonance. If something didn't vibrate with truth, it wasn't worth building. At night, he would lie awake, not restlessly, but alert eyes open in the dark, replaying the motion of the field in his mind over and over, like a lullaby only he knew the tune to. Sometimes he would whisper the names of the components out loud, almost prayerfully. Stator, rotor, sine wave, induction, not for memorization, but to feel them close. He once said, "The present is theirs. The future, for which I really worked, is mine." But at the time, he had no future, not in the practical sense, only vision, only rain on the windowsill, and thoughts that would not leave him. Eventually, he crossed the ocean, carrying nothing but letters of introduction, some drawings, and that quiet insistence in his soul that what he had seen was real. When he arrived in New York, no one knew his name. The streets buzzed with urgency, and still he walked them slowly, as he always had, sometimes with hunger, sometimes with hope. He took small jobs, fixing streetlights, repairing systems built by others, nodding politely at their limitations. But all the while, the motor turned quietly in his thoughts, a silent rhythm, a promise the world didn't yet know it had been given. Years passed like that, until one day, almost by accident or perhaps by quiet design, he met a man who would stop and listen. And for the first time, Tesla didn't just see the field, he spoke it, and someone finally heard. The man who listened was George Westinghouse, a name you may have heard before, but not quite like this. When Tesla met him, the world was already beginning to whisper about electricity, how it could power homes, cities, nations. But no one agreed on how. Edison had already cast his shadow across the skyline, filling rooms with his filaments and machines, building an empire on direct current. DC was strong, yes, but short-lived. It could only travel so far before weakening, like a tired messenger running out of breath. And in the center of that noisy race stood Tesla, holding something no one else could see. A way to send energy, not in a straight line, but as a rhythm, a wave, a heartbeat that could travel miles without fading. When he finally met Westinghouse, he was tired, not from work, but from waiting. From years of being told his vision was too elegant to be real. And Westinghouse, to his credit, didn't ask him for proof right away. He listened, quietly, completely. And when Tesla finished speaking, not with urgency, but with that slow, certain tone of someone who has carried something for a long time, Westinghouse said only this: "You've solved the problem." It was the first time Tesla had heard those words spoken by someone who understood what the problem truly was. That conversation changed everything. In a single handshake, Tesla traded away his patents, his motor, his rotating field, the designs he had cradled in silence for something less tangible, but equally vital: momentum. A chance to build. Together, they lit cities. First small ones, then bigger. AC power began to pulse through neighborhoods that had never known electricity, quiet currents carrying light farther than DC ever could. Edison fought back, of course. There were campaigns, fear, lies. They told people alternating current was dangerous, deadly, unstable. But Tesla didn't argue. He just kept building, kept walking, kept dreaming deeper than anyone else was willing to go. And even in the height of that battle, what history now calls the War of the Currents, he never lost the softness at his core. He wasn't interested in winning. He was interested in truth. There's something beautiful in that. Because while the world shouted, Tesla remained a man of silence. Even his laboratories were quiet spaces, filled with dim blue glow and long moments of observation. No shouting, no sparks flying in triumph, just motion, precision, peace. And when they finally lit the 1,893 Chicago World's Fair with Tesla's system, when hundreds of thousands stood beneath an artificial sky, gasping at the light, it wasn't noise that made it beautiful. It was the calmness of it. The way the world glowed gently, predictably, like a star rising from the hands of a man who never needed applause. That night, as the fair shimmered into the dark, and music played through loudspeakers for the first time in history, Tesla stood off to the side, quietly watching. Not with pride, not with ego, but with a stillness that said, "This is what I saw all those nights ago." And though the crowds would never know the shape of the thoughts he held, their faces were lit by them, every smile, every widened eye, powered by something he once drew in dust beneath a lamppost. The world moved on, as it always does. Crowds faded, lights dimmed, applause was replaced by new noises, new faces, new ambitions. And Tesla, who had once lit entire cities with invisible rhythm, found himself again where he had started in silence. After the Chicago World's Fair, after the turbines at Niagara Falls roared to life powered by his dream, after alternating current had triumphed quietly over the world's resistance, Tesla did not become a king or a titan or even rich. He became instead what he had always been, a man who saw what others couldn't and walked alone. His wealth faded. His name was eclipsed. Other inventors capitalized, built empires, signed deals, sold patents. Tesla signed very little. He gave away royalties, thinking more about movement than money. He once tore up a contract worth millions just to ease the burden on Westinghouse because, to him, the invention had already served its purpose. The rhythm had been released. It didn't belong to him anymore. And as the years passed, Tesla returned to what he always trusted: routine, silence, long walks at night. In New York, where he lived alone in hotel rooms and fed pigeons in the parks, people began calling him eccentric again. The papers liked to make jokes about the man who once danced with lightning, now dining alone, speaking softly to birds. But the truth was quieter and sadder and more beautiful than they ever reported. Tesla wasn't broken. He was just early. The world he belonged to hadn't arrived yet. He had walked so far ahead in thought that by the time others caught up, he was already somewhere else, somewhere only he could see. He spent his final years in a soft kind of exile, surrounded by notebooks no one read, sketches no one funded, and dreams no one could quite follow. And still, every night, he walked down the same streets, past the same lamps, feeding the same birds with trembling hands. And in those final quiet nights, perhaps he was more at peace than ever. The motors had turned. The cities had lit. The world had heard the hum of his silent field. That was enough. He didn't need statues, or speeches, or stamps bearing his face. What he needed, he already had. The memory of that first pattern under the street lamp, the knowledge that he had listened to something few others ever do, the gentle rhythm of truth moving through the dark. When he passed away, It was in a quiet room, alone, the Do Not Disturb sign hanging on the door of his hotel suite like a whisper. No grand ceremony, no final invention, just sleep. And perhaps that's the most fitting ending for a man like Tesla. Not a blaze of light, but a soft return to stillness, a closing of the circuit, a gentle fade into the quiet he always understood better than most. Tonight, as you drift off, maybe you'll think of him of the long walks, the silent diagrams, the birds that waited for him in the park. Maybe you'll hear the hum of something turning in the background, steady and unseen. And maybe, if you listen closely enough, you'll understand what he did, that the most powerful ideas don't arrive with noise. They arrive in stillness, and they stay with you long after the story ends.